More than 300 years had passed since the death of King Solomon, and his kingdom had been split in two. In the north was the kingdom of Israel, with Sichem as its capital, and in the south the kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon found it easy to conquer Jerusalem with his army. He destroyed the city, then plundered the temple and burnt it down. Almost all the people were captured and taken to Babylon. Amongst them was a boy called Daniel. Because he was clever and had been educated, he did not have to do heavy work like the other prisoners, but was allowed to live in the king's court, where he learnt the wisdom and the language of the Babylonians. But even in imprisonment, Daniel remained true to the God of Israel and trusted in him. Because of this, God gave Daniel the gift of predicting the future and the ability to interpret dreams. Daniel became the king's closest advisor and his highest astrologer and interpreter of symbols. When Nebuchadnezzar died, he was succeeded by his son Belshazzar, and Daniel continued to serve the throne of Babylon with his wisdom. But this king too, whose future Daniel had prophesied, was to die after a feast. He was murdered by the soldiers of King Darius, who had conquered Babylon. Darius, the new king of Babylon, took a liking to Daniel. He valued his wisdom and made him the highest governor of the kingdom. But this made the other courtiers and governors full of envy, and they considered how they could destroy him. Because they could find no other grounds than Daniel's belief in his God, they went to the king with an evil plan. "May you live forever, great king. No one shall enjoy greater prestige than you in your kingdom, and no one should ask anything from any god or anyone else before you. Order this for 30 days, then we will see who really obeys you and who doesn't during this time. Whoever disobeys your command in these days and asks something of any god or other person should be thrown into the lion's den." The king was flattered by this speech from his courtiers and their suggestion, so he put his seal to the new law. The king's messengers spread news of the law throughout the land. Even Daniel heard it. But for him there was nothing to think about. He had only one God, who sat above all people, and he wanted to pray to him alone. He quickly went to a window, knelt down, and prayed to God to help and protect him. But the devious courtiers were watching Daniel, and they reported to the king what they had seen. When Darius heard them, he was very upset. He liked Daniel and wondered how he could save him. But the governors and the courtiers said to him, "You have given your royal word. According to our laws, a command with your seal upon it cannot be countermanded." So, with a heavy heart, Darius ordered Daniel to be brought, and for him to be thrown into the lion's den. "I hope that your God, whom you serve so faithfully, will help you," said the king to Daniel. Then a heavy stone was laid over the entrance to the den, and the king placed his seal on it. Early the next day, the king hurried with his servants to the den and called out, "Daniel, was your God able to rescue you from the lions?" "Greetings, my king," answered Daniel. "God did protect me. Not one lion has harmed me, because I am innocent before God and before you." Then the king had the den opened, and they were all amazed to see Daniel sitting in the den, surrounded on all sides by the lions, which were sitting peacefully as little kittens. Daniel was taken out of the den, and they all stared at him. There was not the slightest scratch on him, but the king had the men who so evilly tried to fool him thrown into the lion's den, and the lions immediately pounced on them and ate them all up. Daniel was greatly honored by King Darius and served him for many years. He became a great prophet, and God repaid his faith with a long and fulfilled life.
Jonah and the Whale. For nearly 50 years, many Israelites lived in exile in Babylon. It was only the wise Persian king Cyrus who allowed them to return to their homeland. With his help, they rebuilt the city of Jerusalem and their temple. Prophets wandered throughout the land and proclaimed the will of God to the people. One of these prophets was Jonah. One day, God spoke to Jonah. "I have a task for you. Go to the city of Nineveh and tell the people there that I have seen their evil. Tell them, if they do not change, they will be destroyed along with their city." But Jonah did not want to make the long journey to the city of Nineveh. They were enemies of his people and heathens. So he decided to hide from God and to flee to an even more distant country. In the harbour at Joppa, he boarded a ship that was sailing to Tarshish. That's far enough from Nineveh and from God, he thought to himself. Then he lay down below deck and fell asleep. But God had known all along where Jonah was, and he sent a mighty storm, which made the waves on the sea rise up like towers. The sailors became afraid as the ship was thrown about by the waves and threatened to capsize. They prayed to their gods and said to each other, "We want to know who is guilty of bringing us this bad luck. Let us cast lots to discover his name." And the lot fell to Jonah. So the sailors brought him on deck and asked him, "Who are you, and where'd you come from?" He answered that he was hiding from God because he had disobeyed him. "I am guilty of this violent storm. God has already found me. Throw me into the sea and nothing will happen to you." The sailors were horrified at what Jonah had told them. And they tried once more with all their might to bring the ship under control, but the storm just became stronger. So the sailors did throw Jonah overboard, and the storm immediately calmed itself. The black clouds went away and the sun came out again. Jonah kicked about in the water and was greatly afraid of drowning, but God sent a mighty fish to swallow him. And Jonah spent 3 days in the fish's stomach and prayed to God. "I know that I disobeyed you. Forgive me. You have the power to rescue me. Please help me, and I will do anything you want me to." Then God commanded the fish to swim to the shore and to spit Jonah out. And God called to Jonah once again and said to him, "Now go to Nineveh and tell the people there of my message." This time, Jonah did not need telling twice, and he set off on his way. When he arrived in Nineveh, he was astonished at how big the city was. It took him 3 days to walk from one end to the other. He explained what God had planned for them if they didn't better themselves. "Just 40 more days, then Nineveh will be destroyed." Jonah shouted, but he thought to himself, "They will not convert. Their downfall is a certainty." But the people of Nineveh did believe Jonah's words, and they did indeed convert. They began to pray and to fast, and repented their sins. Even the king put away his expensive clothes, wore simple ones, and did penance. He ordered his subjects to commit no more injustices and to follow God's commandments. When God saw that the people of Nineveh had changed, he decided to spare the city. But Jonah did not agree at all. He had already prophesied that the city would be destroyed, and what had happened? Nothing. He didn't understand God anymore. Angrily, he left the city and sat down on a stone. It was very hot, and the sun burned down on him. So God let a vine grow next to Jonah, which gave him shade. This pleased Jonah, and he fell comfortably asleep. The next morning, God sent a worm, which ate the vine, so that it withered and lost its leaves. Once again, Jonah was sitting in the hot sunshine without any protective shade. He became angry and said to God, "How can you permit such a beautiful vine to wither away? And apart from that, I cannot stand this heat any longer. I would